Hey, my friends, today we're going to stay on the theme of the super big and super strong, and we're going to talk about don't mess around with Jim. Jim who? This guy. Here he's doing 5 1/4 for 10 reps, no bench shirt, anything else. Pretty much a flat bencher, and he was called the Big Black Bear of Scranton by numerous people, and kind of an appropriate name. He's over 6 feet tall. There it is, the Big Black Bear from Scranton, Jim Williams. And there's actually an article that was done by Bill West with that title. This one that we're going to start with is another Ron Fernando article from '83. There's the bear himself with Bob Hoffman and John Cook. John Cook was Jim Williams' training partner for a long time in Scranton. This is talking about a typical workout, and we're going to get into some more workouts, which is out of Jim's training manual, which I was able to find online, and I'm going to have some other excerpts from that. This whole thing here, this is the book in question. There he is on the cover. Had some interesting ideas about training, and it goes on here about kind of his mental approach to things. And then he goes on for a pretty long time about figuring out how much you could bench based on some interesting math calculations. And kind of along the lines where George Friend and the guys from the original West Side Club did that too, where they would figure out if you could do a certain weight for a certain number of reps, it should lead to X max. And they were actually surprisingly pretty accurate with that whole situation. And the interesting thing about Jim is, one of the interesting things, first of all, he was in prison, which most people know. Unfortunately, Scranton was a cold town, wasn't a whole lot of great things going on there. When he was younger, when he was like 21, he ended up in prison for like 10 years for basically a petty theft. It was like $80 and a guy's watch that he ended up doing 10 years for. But he was able to they did have weights there. Here he is getting ready to squat like 800 plus. You see how big his legs are. His legs were like 33 or 35 or something like that. They were monstrous, just like the rest of his body. His normal training weight was well over 3. He was like somewhere between 3 1/4 and 335. There he is deadlifting. And so as great as his bench press was, he was not really a bench press specialist. I mean, he kind of was, but he also did the other lifts. And here he is talking about this crazy math thing. I put it here because it's part of his book. It's part of the article. And I'm sure there's some value to it. A little bit difficult to follow, but we'll end up talking about his low rep routine, ultimately, again, which is out of the book. This is kind of a collage. You see him benching big weight there, he had 23-inch biceps, and his chest was just humongous. His chest was like 60. And he talks about, he ends up doing 675 in the 72 AAU World Championships, which pretty much right after that, the IPF came along and they said, all previous world records basically don't exist anymore, AAU records. Here he is claiming that he did 720, which I'm sure he probably did in training, how training things go. But he did 700 in front of a bunch of people at York Barbell, which he's going to describe further on. But here's his low rep routine. And you can, pause it, take a good hard look at it. Now, ultimately, he really wanted to end up at 770, and he thought it could be done by the right man, whether it be him or somebody else. Here he is benching big again. I think this was like 628, which was one of his earlier records before he eventually. Here's talking about going to the York Barbell Picnic, which they had every year. And a guy from the gym I used to go to went there, which I talked about in my book, which was about Pennsylvania. Also, of course, I talked about Jim Williams and John Cook in that book. There he is deadlifting. You could just see how massive he was. And really didn't use much in the way of supportive gear except those knee wraps for squatting and deadlifting. And then he would put just like ace bandages around his elbows benching. Didn't really have a bench shirt or any of that stuff. So there he is with Precious McKenzie. They're just showing the difference in size between those guys back in those days. And they're saying, 350 for Jim, which he was at least somewhere in that ballpark. He did have in his book, he has what he calls the Hall of Fame, which is a bunch of lifters that were before and up to his time. There he is. But he has a lot of respect for guys like Kazmaier and all the great benchers, some of whom we've done videos on. But again, he was not just a great bencher. He was a great all-around lifter. He's talking about other big guys. And this is not him, I don't think. I think this might be Odie Wilson. But it does talk about Josh Bryant did a video on him. Again, titled it something to the effect of the Big Black Bear from Scranton and his lifting. And said that when he was... of course, he was never a 90-pound weakling. When he was 12 years old, he was 200 pounds and not a fat 200 pounds. Ultimately, in high school, he ended up being over 300 pounds and could dunk a basketball at over 300 pounds. So he's a remarkable athlete, really, all around. Here he is again shown. This is the 628. But he talks about... assistance work in his book here, and this is a whole page where he goes into talking about doing lat work, which is very important to him. Now, he did unfortunately end up after that 72 Worlds going back to jail, but he did find the Lord there, and there he was with Anthony Clark, who was another born-again Christian. And he talks about, in the end, that the things that were most important to him were God and family. Now, these days, we have this gentleman, it's Mr. Julius Maddox, who's also throwing up crazy bench presses without all the shirts and all that stuff. But now, he did ultimately beat, and you'll see a little list here on his website. Incidentally, Julius does a much better job marketing himself. There you see him throwing up some crazy weight. So I think in this, I'm not sure if it's this picture, but he does in 2021, he did 782, and you'll see that here. But you'll see how he goes from 739 to 744 to 771. I think when he did the 771, maybe he had that 770 in mind that Mr. Williams was talking about. However, if you look at Julius's weight here, he runs between 430 and 470, whereas Jim never really got past 350. So imagine what Jim might have done had he gone up to that crazy weight. It's just mind-boggling. And like I said, back in that 72 Worlds, the AAU Worlds, where he did an 825 squat, 7 1/4 deadlift, and a 675 bench, which in those days was just insane. Even these days, it's tough. And so, of course, Arcidi did 700, but I'm pretty sure he had a little more supportive gear than did Jim. So, thanks for watching, and I'm out.